16 by 20 is probably about the smaller size that I recommend when you're first starting out with portraits. Anything smaller than that becomes a little difficult because you have to work super accurately. Alright, so I started out with a photo. Now, what I did was, on the original photo, I felt because it was a posed photo in the studio, their lighting was maybe just a tad strong. So I did use Photoshop, or my drawing program, to just slightly adjust and add a touch more yellow over the entire painting, just to bring in that extra little bit of warmth in the highlight areas. Alright, so what I did was, my drawing program allows me to print out tiled pages. So I printed out the actual photograph to 16 by 20, and then I printed it out and I tiled them, and then I stuck that onto the window, and I used another sheet of paper also tiled to the same size as the canvas, and I transferred the watercolor, using the watercolor pencil, I transferred my lines onto that piece of paper. Then I stuck my baking paper on top of that so that I can redraw my lines. Now, when I've just started, what I do is I check to make sure that the lines are transferring onto the canvas. There you can see me doing that. Once it's done, then I line up my baking paper with the lines that have been transferred onto the canvas, and I make my hinges at the top. Now, obviously my baking paper wasn't broad enough, so what I did was I just made sure the baking paper covered the most important features of the face. So you'll see there I've cut away the forehead. There's no details there, so I had nothing to lose. Right, so I stick my reference photo up on the wall, and it's time to start mixing my colors. I don't mix every single color. In our exercises, we've been mixing almost every color. My whole idea with that was to get you used to mixing different tonal values and seeing them. It's great exercise, seeing those different tonal values. When I'm doing a full portrait like this, I'm only going to mix the three main colors. So I'm going to look out for the main highlight. So in this case, I used sort of around the chin area, just underneath her mouth. I used that as the highlight. Then on the front cheek, the one on the left hand side, seems to be a nice middly color, so I mixed that. And then underneath her chin on her neck seemed to be my darkest shadow. So those are the three colors that I mixed up over there. Then I also mixed up the colors for my iris. So as usual, I follow my normal recipe of correct colors in the correct places. Now, when painting the eye, I look out for getting the iris 100% round for the angle. Remember, if your iris is if your eye is at a bit of an angle, then you'll find that you have to turn it into an oval. But when looking at it from that angle, it still looks like a circle. Then I concentrated on getting that nice dark edge on the outside, as well as getting the shadow cast by the top eyelid into that iris area. This model didn't have too much lines in her eye, so you can see I've just slightly suggested it. Alright, moving on to the white of the eye. What I did there was I just got the correct tonal values as far as I could in the correct places. Now again, I'm concentrating on getting the rounding of the eye correct, of the eyeball correct, to make it look as though it's tucking in underneath the top and the bottom eyelid. Then with the tear duct piece, again, it's just small little quick shading. Don't try and put in too much effort there. You'll see I've put a little bit of a shadow in, and later on, there we go, I'll put in a bit of a highlight So it's still a full shading, but don't put in any effort, don't try and get any fancy details in there, it's really not necessary. Alright, when it comes to painting the upper eyelid, what I do there is I look out for the tonal value. In other words, I want to get from here through to here, I'm trying to get that tonal shading correct, because that shows me the rounding. Then I'm also looking for that shading from front to back, because you've got this little fold or crease over here, right? So I'm looking for that shading as well, to make sure I get that correct. Now, when I start a portrait like this, you haven't quite got a feel for the painting itself and for the actual colors. So you'll find that I'm constantly checking myself and adjusting still. So revisiting areas actually quite often at this stage. Once you get going, you'll find that you get a better feel for your actual colors and what needs to go where as far as the tonal values and colors are concerned. So then there's less revisiting. Alright, so once I'm happy with my tonal values and stuff, I add my little reflections in. They come in right at the end. Then I've also put in the width of or the thickness of the lower eyelid. Again, remember that's a little shading, so I've got that little shading going from the left hand side to the right hand side. So it's darker over here and lighter over there. And from there I'll start off with the lower eyelid itself. So there I'm looking for my shading going from there to show me that it's round and not flat. Then you also get a shading from there to there. So this would say be lighter and this here would say be darker. You just got to take a look, how's the light hitting your model over there. So you look at that. This model, she's nice and young and still quite pretty, so there wasn't too many wrinkles and stuff to worry about. So you'll see I've suggested very lightly, but you know, in somebody like this, I don't tend to worry too much about it. Now the eyes are one of your main features. It's the focal point. We've chatted about that before, so it's super important for us to get that right. So you'll see I'm constantly using my baking paper to check myself over and over and over again. I've got to get the eyes 100% correct. As you move along, you've got your eyes, and then eventually when you've your nose and your mouth, you'll also use the baking paper quite a bit. And for the rest, you'll find you're using it less and less and less. For the upper eyelid, oh, this is actually not the upper eyelid, this is the recess over here. Again, I'm trying to get this little fold or that crease over there. So I know this area here is going to be reasonably smooth, and then it's going to have a quick little shading there into that crease. With that, most of the eye is now finished. It's just the eyelashes. So I leave that till later, because I'm not sure if I still need to adjust my colors. So until I've got my left eyelid in, I tend to, or my left eye a little bit further, I tend to leave the eyelashes. On the right hand side of the eye, it's same techniques, but remember you've got those tonal value differences, so I'm really concentrating very heavily to get those tonal value differences in, to make sure that I get a nice little feel for my tonal ranges between the sun side and the shadow side. When it comes to those reflections in the eyes, I always remember my two most important ones, which is this one over here and that one over there. If I can squeeze in the odd little extra one like this, that just adds that extra realism to it. So look out for them and put them in. Alright, so now I'm going to start with, now that I've got a a better feel. Now I'm going to start putting in the eyelashes on the left hand side. If you want to, you can actually leave your eyelashes till right at the end, even after a week later. It doesn't matter, because your eyelashes always overlap everything else. You can leave your eyelashes way till the end, until the rest of your painting is dry. So if you do feel you're still battling with your eyelashes, don't be shy to leave them till last. What I'm looking out for you is to make sure I get my angles and my directions correct. In other words, you see how the directions change. It starts off over here, then it goes straight as the eyelash looks towards you, and then gradually it starts curling this way as your eye curls around and the eyelashes start pointing more and more away from you. Then I've also looked out for the clumps to make sure your eyelashes are clumping together. If you paint one individual eyelash after the next, it doesn't look natural. Alright, so then I moved on to the right edge to finish off the right eye over there. Let's just take a look. I think this area, yeah, again, it's more of a repeat of the previous, so I'm going to forward this again. So let's zoom that on there. I'm doing the main thing that I'm concentrating on this side of the face again is just to get those tonal values correct. When the painting takes 14 hours, how long do you spend painting in each session, and how do you know when is a good point to stop? What I do is, I tend to paint as much as I can. For me to paint 8 hours solid is not a problem. This painting here I painted over 3 days. So the first day I painted, now I'm just trying to remember, I painted the eyes and the nose, and I think I stopped over there. Then the next day I went over to the cheeks and the chin and the forehead, so I basically got the entire face done. Then I had to stop. Then the next day I completed the rest, the hair and the hands. There's no real good place to stop. I try and sort of stop at the end of a feature, because then you tend to have a nice ending place. If you do need to stop at any stage, you see what I do. I don't get these edges here sharp. Remember, there's very few found lines in a portrait. So I keep my edges soft. So if I do ever need to stop, then I've got these soft edges which are easy to continue working over. If you have a hard line there, it stops in a really sharp line, you battle to get that hard line away. You'll actually find that this line over here, because of my stopping, in the end final painting I'd never soften this line up. I forgot about it. And you'll see in my final painting that line is actually harder than it should be. Alright, so when it comes to the nose, I'm looking out for getting the 3 planes. 1, 2, 3, remember, on the bridge of the nose. And then I'm working on getting the 3 little balls that merge into each other on the tip of the nose. So I'm looking out for those little highlights and shadings as those little balls curve away from the light. Then when it comes to the actual nostril, what I'm doing there is I'm trying to get that looking in effect. You see you got this little reflected light here on the tip of the nose, and over here and over here. So I've made sure I've painted those in because they add realism, they add light. What size brush did I use for the eyelashes? I used a number 4 fine round, which I'd shaped into a chisel point. Alright, now let's move on to the left cheek. With the left cheek, I know that I've got 2 areas. I've got the cheekbone over here, and I've got the flat area over here. So I've started off with the the rounded cheekbone area. So I'm looking out for the curvature of it. So tonal values are going to give you that, using your different tonal values shaded into each other to show you that rounding over there. Then you'll also see I've got a little bit of a reflected light area over here, which I've made sure I worked in because that shows you nice sunlight. You can see me working that area there, trying to get rid of that line, but it just didn't want to disappear on me. Alright, now you'll find as I'm doing this area, yeah, I'm gradually starting to go wider and wider and wider. As I see the color I'm using, I see it on a different area on the face, or an adjacent area on the face. So as I'm working, I'm gradually starting to fiddle around with the upper lip as well. And often I'll start fiddling with the cheek and the furrow and those kind of areas as I see I've got the correct colors. Okay, so now let's move on to the upper lip. What's really important there is getting that furrow correct. Take a look and see how pronounced it is for your model. And then remember, you want to get the two different planes of the lip correct. So this plane over here and this back plane over there. And then the furrow, that little concave furrow, no, sorry, not furrow, Philrum in the center area. So it's a very, very subtle shading. But you have to paint it. Otherwise, you're not going to get that nice little transition from the left to the right. And it's also going to mess you around when you get to painting the lips. So concentrate on those subtle little shadings. Stand back often when you're painting the upper lip. That's going to give you your best view of that Philrum in the center. Then also remember to look out for that cast shadow on the nose, or on the upper lip that the nose casts. That's really important, because that's going to give you the height of the nose of the face. Okay, the right hand cheek, again I'm concentrating on getting the depth and the perspective correct. So I'm looking for any kind of shadings and cast shadows that would be on this cheek here caused by the nose. And I'm also looking for found lines to get me that distance of the nose off the face. And I'm also looking for those little lost lines. You see here, that tiny amount of highlight over there shows my third plane on the nose. So it's really important that you look carefully on that distant cheek. You tend to think, oh, it's far away, you don't need to put too much attention into it. But yeah, you do need to, because that distant cheek gives you your height of the nose. Alright, so moving down onto the sides of the cheek now and heading in towards the chin. They tend to sort of go hand in hand, so I'll end up painting them one on one like that. Why don't I use my finger to blend? There's physically not enough paint on the canvas to use your finger. By the time I've finished the painting, there is not a single brush stroke in sight, simply because there's only enough canvas or enough paint to cover the canvas. Okay, so let's take a look over here. This little shading over here was quite important in this particular portrait, because that helped give me that quick curve here from the mouth and give me that little distance between the mouth and the side cheek over here. To get this molding of the chin, it's nothing funny. I've used the normal process of correct colors in the correct places. Here on the lower lip, you see I'm adding that little, almost a cast shadow. Remember, this is your darkest plane. That plane and that plane is actually lighter. So I've made sure I've got that little shadow over there, because this shadow is going to eventually make my bottom lip have its height. And you see here at the bottom, I'm working in that little recess in the center of the chin over there. Look really carefully to see how prominent your models is. How prominent is will depend on how much contrast you give between this side of the recess and that side of the recess. The same goes for over here, where your lower lip and the top of the chin meet. You got this little area over here. Look very carefully to see how prominent that is. Often it's very subtle. It's almost becomes almost straight line, but we know it's not. So stand back often if it's subtle, and make sure that you're seeing those tiny tonal value adjustments. You can see here I'm gradually building up the tones as well until I'm 100% happy. At this point in time, I actually got to a point where I noticed that my back tonal values weren't quite dark enough. So you'll find that I've actually darkened this up some more. Now, the minute I did that, to get this rounding correct, it meant that my tonal values on my right hand cheek weren't correct anymore. They were now too light. So although they initially looked good, they actually weren't. Now those are the kind of things that you'll find happens as you're painting. So while I'm painting, I consider every area to be 90% finished and not 100% finished. Because you've got all this white canvas around the areas that you're painting, that white really does confuse your eye a lot. Now that does make one case for sort of toning your canvas, but I've told you my reasons for not liking to tone the canvas. I find I lose that luminosity because now you've got a darker area underneath. With the portraits we're painting really thin, so I do really believe that the paint, the sunlight goes through the pigment and hits the canvas, the white of the canvas, and bounces back and gives me a nice luminous effect. So I'd much rather go back and rework that area of the cheek like you can see I'm doing now. I'm also just want to back up for a few seconds because I want to show you the little dimple area as well. Alright, so I'm even going to let's get rid of my hand over there, hopefully. There. This little dimple area over here was quite distinctive on this model. So what I did was I spent a reasonable amount of time, because it's super subtle shadings. You see I had a little shading over there, a little shading over here. Here's a little, these are convex ones, and here's a little concave shading. There's a little shading as it rounds out to meet the cheek. And then you've got this little indentation here from the actual mouth itself. So lots happening in that area. So I was really careful with tiny amounts of paint. Often I was almost just using a clean dry brush just to spread the paint that was already on the canvas around to give me that little dimple area over there. Okay, so now after that I'm starting to get actually quite a good feel for the face. So the last little hole in my canvas in the face area is the mouth, so let's hit that one with a vengeance. I'll start with the upper lip. I just tend to work from top lip, bottom lip. It's just a habit I've got. You can start the bottom lip, it doesn't really matter. So here what I'm looking out for is getting that looking in effect. So I know the little area on the inside against the teeth, the inside of the mouth has got to be darker. So I immediately look out for that shading. If that little dark area is not there, I'm actually going to put it in. I'm going to use my artist license. Now some people's upper lip or top lip is flatter than others, so sometimes you can't use too much artist license by adding in too much contrast. Then I'm also looking out for ways that I can show this plane and that plane on the actual mouth. So in this model, her lips are actually pretty even colored. So I did find a small little change. You can see me adjusting it there now. A small little change in tonal value over there. It was super slight. But I kept looking until I found it. And I put it in, and you can see there that just that tiny adjustment in tone has made all the difference. You can now see the two sides. Then I also look out for this little, see if there's a little highlighty area that tends to surround the lips. And I also, once I'm happy with that, I fade this line here away, because she hasn't got lipstick on. She does have lip gloss, but not lipstick. So I faded that little edge over there away to make sure I don't get that lipstick look. Good stuff. Let's move on to the bottom lip. Here I need to get two roundings, because the mouth rounds around like this. So I'm going to have this area which is closer to the sun, and I've got this area here which is further away from the sun. Plus I've got my little corners of the mouth which go darker, right? So I'm looking out for that shading there. Plus I've got the fullness of the lip where your lip does this. So I'm looking out for the lighter and the darker areas. So your highlight tends to be roughly around this kind of area, right? And goes dark on the inside and usually dark on the outside as well. So I'm looking for those little roundings over there to get that fullness and the shape of the mouth right. After that, I start concentrating on the cracks and the reflected light in the mouth, because that's the one that really makes the mouth sparkle. This model didn't have very prominent cracks, so I had to work really subtle. So it's small little tonal values. So even though I'm still doing all the normal things, I'm having to use very small differences in tonal value to get it correct. There you can also see me just softening up the edge to make sure I don't get a lipstick look. Now remember, those cracks and the reflections, the directions you put them in, are going to give you the fullness of the lip as well. How much time do I study the picture to find all the different shadings? That's a difficult question for me to answer, because obviously now my eye is pretty well trained to spot all those finer details. You'll find as you go along, you spot finer differences easier. In the beginning, you miss lots and lots of little fine subtle shadings. It's a case of your eye needs to be trained, so the more you paint, the easier they become to spot. So I don't spend a lot of time finding them, but I do always bear in mind where I need to look out for them, and that helps me find those little subtle shadings easier. Alrighty, now let's move on to the mouth. Don't you think her teeth look absolutely disgusting at the moment? Now remember, we've discussed that your teeth aren't white. So I found the underlying color and I blocked in the teeth with that underlying color. And then I found my shadow color and I put them in the correct places. And as I shade them in, it becomes a lot softer. So your teeth don't look that bad anymore. But they'll still look absolutely terrible until the mouth is complete. The reason for that is now you've got your teeth themselves are now surrounded by white. So that white area there and there makes this look darker than what it is. Remember, a bright light needs a dark shadow. So by having a darker shadow in, you've automatically by having a bright light there, you're making your dark shadows look darker because you've got a higher contrast. Don't worry about it, just absolutely continue. When you're done, she won't have scary teeth, I promise. Okay, so there I'm busy with my gums. Again, I'm just making sure I'm getting that little shadow from the top lip that's falling on top of the gum, and I'm getting that little bit of a rounding. Then right at the end of the day, I come back in and I soften the edge where the gum meets the teeth, and that makes your teeth and your gum meet naturally, and that way you don't get scary witch teeth. There I'm adding in the inside of the mouth, so that's that really as dark as I can skin tone. but it's still got quite a bit of life color in it, so it's not a dull gray. It still always ends up being a bit of a reddy color. And the minute you put that in, you see suddenly the teeth come alive. And then don't forget in the teeth to add in those little reflections right at the end of the day. If you haven't got enough color into your teeth initially, you're not going to have those enough contrast to be able to put in those reflections. Yeah, I think the face is looking pretty good at this stage, so I'm decided to move on to onto the neck. This is my biggest contrast area, so I use that initial dark mix and then I just adjust the colors from there, or the tonal values from there. Because I've now moved away from my focal area, I'm starting to use less and less detail now. So I'm not trying to get any kind of fancy shadings or wrinkles or creases or anything funny in there. It's just the minimum amount of shading I can get away with to show that a neck is round and get all the actual shadows that's been cast on the neck correct. That's all I'm going to do. Absolutely the minimal work there. It is important to look out for those cast shadows when you're doing the neck, because remember that cast shadow brings your whole face forward. I think you can already start to see the minute I put in that shadow, my whole face has sort of popped up. You can see the chin is standing up off the face already, which is really nice because now from this point on I'm starting to see a 3D face and not a flat face anymore. That there's also just a little tiny area on the chin that's peeping out between the hands. In retrospect, I think my actual color on the neck was a little dull. My wife says it looks like there's a stocking pulled over her neck. So I suspect I'm going to leave my painting now for a week or two, and then I suspect I may do a color wash and just add a little bit more warmth into the shadow of the neck. Alright, so now I need to do my forehead. So at this point in time I have to lose my baking paper, so there goes my little security blanket. So I have to really start trusting myself. What I look out for is trying to get this rounding over here. So remember we chatted about it last week. Can you see the keystone? So I've worked on that keystone to get that effect correct, and shadows. And then I've also looked for areas like here, which is actually pointing towards the light, but I've got hair that she's got a fringe that comes over here, and now that hair threw or cast a shadow in this area over here. So I've tried to as far as possible get that shadow in there now already, because it's going to be very difficult when I put in the actual hair from the fringe. It's going to be very hard to work in these little shadows afterwards. So I have to be proactive and work them in now already. Then I've also, you see I've got a little reflected light area, so constantly throughout my painting I'm looking out for those little reflected light areas. So from there you'll find that now all my skin colors are done. So let me quickly see if I can pause that and show you what my palette looked like over there. Okay, so this is what my palette looked like at the end of the day. So tons and tons and tons of impromptu mixes all over the show. So here's all my mid-tone impromptu mixes, here's the shadowy impromptu mixes, there's the highlight impromptu mixes. This over here is all my colors that I used for the eye. So again, see all these little adjustments. At one point I needed just the tiniest dab of yellow, so I made it just the tiniest dab of yellow. Alright, so then I scooped this color up, that one up, and I moved them to the side, and I cleaned the rest of the palette, and that helped me create some space for me to be able to do the hair. So let's continue there. So there's the colors that I mixed for the hair. I just looked for the basic shadings. Now I have obviously drawn in some lines on the canvas. Now I'm using those lines and looking at the detailless areas of the hair to get my shadings correct. So I'm not trying to paint hair at this stage. I'm painting the moldings. Highlights, midtones and shadows. What's really important to look out for here is look out for your areas where you've got lights against darks. Those little contrasty kind of areas like that. Because when you've got a light against the dark, for example, keep your eye on this area over here as I develop it. Because there I've got a little piece where the hair is, this clump of hair over here is lifted up off that side over there. So take a look how I continue to develop that area to play up that little extra bit of height over there. Because that's going to give me that depth that I need in the hair. While I was painting this, I saw that in this area over here there was a little bit of an aubany color in that area there, and I quite liked that. So I decided to actually use my artist license and use a bit more of that color all over the hair. And I'm glad I did. I quite liked the color of her hair. I felt on the original painting her hair was just a little bit too yellow and dull. And with me bringing in that auburn, I felt it livened everything up. So, because I don't know the model, I wasn't shy about coloring her hair for her. Alright, you see how I'm developing that little area over there? And look how this whole piece here is now starting to stand up off the rest. And this little shadow over here has made this area here sort of tuck in underneath that front piece over there. Now once I feel I've got my basic shadings in the correct places, then I start just roughening up those shadings again. Still using my soft full bit. Now you can see I'm just sort of stabbing it in the direction of the hairs, and that's just giving me very rough lines. Absolutely no detail. I'm still not trying to create detail. I'm just creating those clumps that you find in the hair. Now to get the looking in effect, we use what we call vignetting, so lots of detail over here and less as we move away from our focal point. So you'll see here at the back I add absolutely no detail into the back area there, beyond this little bit of a stabbing feeling over there, to get those clumps. I'll never come back in and add individual hairs at the back there, because it's simply it's going to attract too much attention away from the main area of the face. Alright, when I paint the eyebrows, I'm looking out for the shapes, I'm looking out for the colors, and I'm trying to make sure that, because like this model's eyebrows weren't very prominent, so they were actually quite subtle, the colors. So I was concentrating pretty hard to make sure that I get those tonal values correct in the hair as well, so that they don't look, if I made them too dark, they would look pasted on. Now while I'm doing this, take a look at my face, and you'll see how my head is constantly bobbing left to right. So keep comparing with my reference material the whole time to make sure I get that shape of those eyebrows correct. Alright, here you can see me, I've thinned down my paint to the consistency of an ink. All three, mid-tone, highlight and the shadow. And now I'm just using a sort of a flicking motion to flick in some individual hairs here on the foreground area. Most of these highlights are all the brighter colors, but sometimes when I feel I need a little bit more contrast or so on, I would flick in a few darker ones as well. And it's just these few little flicks that give me all the detail that I need in the hair. Okay, once I've done with that, I'm going to move on to the fringe. Now, when I'm doing the fringe, again, I'm really have to concentrate on getting the clumps correct and getting the directions correct. Now, it takes a lot of confidence to just paint straight over the wet canvas like this. If you find yourself in a situation like this and you're still not 100% confident, rather wait until your face itself is dry, because if it's wet like this, you know, there's no, very difficult for me to lift anything out at this stage without having to end up repainting the whole forehead. So rather wait until it's dry, then come back in and add your fringe in, or those overlapping hairs. With the bottom dry, it's easy to lift them out. Now over here, what I'm doing is I'm looking out for the shadings and stuff. So you'll find that over here at the top area, I'm actually filling it up a little bit more than what it's actually on the photograph, because I found that it was a little bit too much skin over here. I've worked in a little bit more shadow color over there as well. So I picked up some of this and popped it in between there, and that just helped me sort of connect the fringe to the main body of the hair by making it fuller over there. Then at the end of the day, I still come back in once I've got my directions and my clumps and everything in correct and I'm happy with them. I'll still come back in and I'll add some darker ones, add some lighter ones to still give me body. You can see how I've done it over here, and that's just given me that height. Now again, remember, you've also, when you painted the forehead, we worked in some shadows and stuff, right? So now be careful that you don't go and paint on top of the shadow. You're going to now paint next to the shadow, right? If you paint on top of it, you lose that height. Alright, so what I did was, I went ahead and I completed the right hand side of the hair as well. Okay, so on this side over here, again, I put in lots of detail in this area over here, right up against the face. These areas over here, absolutely no detail. I haven't worried about detail over there. And again, over here, I haven't worried about any kind of detail because I'm moving away from the face, so it's almost, it becomes a little bit flat over there, and that's great. I'm happy with that, because if I start adding too much detail, especially because these are lines, your eye follows a line and your eye follows down a line. So I didn't want it too stripy over here, because that'll just draw your eye right out the picture. Then here I did add a little bit of, just using one or two darker colors, did add a bit of detail there in there to indicate the flyaway hairs over there by the neck. Alrighty, so this is what my palette looked like after I'd finished the hair. Now I always keep my paints, I never throw any paints away until I'm finished the portrait, or until I'm finished any painting for that matter. So I've scooped all my paints and I've popped them down on the side, and I've brought back my skin tones so that I can do the hands. So we're nearly finished with the painting. It's pretty awesome. The portrait itself is done, so now we almost, you can say, we're busy doing the secondary focal points and stuff. One of the things that sort of drew me to this portrait was the hands. It seemed to frame the face quite nicely. It made it nice, friendly painting. So I like that. I think that's why I decided on this painting. Alright, hands, people are terrified of hands now. Let me tell you, hands are absolutely, there's nothing to them. If you've painted a portrait, painting hands is peanuts, because it's correct colors at the correct places as usual. Now, what I am looking out for at this stage is just getting those correct tonal values, the correct places, and I'm treating each segment, or whatever you want to call it. So in other words, the top half of your thumb over here and the bottom half over there, I'm treating each one of those as an individual item. I'm not trying to paint one long solid thumb, because each one could be at a different angle. So look out for differences in tonal value from that. I'm still looking for the correct word, but that segment over there and that segment over here, and you usually get that little bit of a crack there in between, or a wrinkle. It did take me quite a while to put in the correct colors in the correct places, because you've got so many different angles, it does take a while. But once I felt I have 90% or 80% of the canvas covered over there, I felt it was good enough for me to start shading. So I cleaned my brush, got rid of all the excess paint, and I just start blending in the basic colors at the basic places. Now you'll notice as I've done the hands, I've added no fancy little, I haven't gone back and added any detailed creases and stuff in. I haven't added any little lines on the palm and things like that. I've got absolute basic shadings, basic places, and I've left it like that. I don't want the detail over there, again, to get my vignetting effect correct, and to make sure that the hands don't now go and compete and trying to attract more attention than the face. I get that right by not adding any detail into them. They are just there to frame the face. They're not there to compete with the face. Now we can do the next hand. The last little bit of white on the canvas. It's sort of at this point where you become quite tempted, because now you're probably 12 hours down the road or whatever. You become quite tempted to rush things, because you after that point in time you start getting a little sick of the painting, to be quite honest. If you find yourself in that situation, rather just stop, because carry on tomorrow or the next day. It doesn't matter. Rome wasn't built in a day. You don't have to finish a painting in any kind of record time or anything like that. It's more important that your end result lasts forever. So it's more important that you get the final painting looking good. So if at any stage you feel you're getting tired or bored or anything with the painting, rather stop. When the inspiration hits you again, then you carry on with the painting. So never give yourself, I know a lot of people do that, they sort of give themselves a time goal, you could say. Say, all right, I want this painting finished by this time next week or whatever. Never do that to yourself. Paint at your speed, whatever you need to. If you need to take a month or 2 or 3 months to finish a painting, it doesn't matter, guys. It's more important that you get the end result correct. Alright, so once I've got to this point, I'm happy with my painting. Then it's time to sign it. Now when you are signing your painting, don't use any brand new colors in the painting. Just sign it with one of the colors around there. I think I used one of the hair colors. Yeah, I had a quick spot on the painting. I just used one of the hair colors, so whatever was on the canvas. In this case, what I've done is I've signed my name over here, in this area here. So in other words, inside the looking room of the painting, you see that? Your model is facing in, so I've left looking room over here. I've signed inside that little looking room area. I feel if you had to sign on the other side of this painting, it would somehow feel a little bit heavy on that side, because now everything is, all the important things are there. So I've signed over there. I've used a nice I've thinned down my paints to the consistency of an ink so that it can flow. And I've given myself a good 2 centimeters at least away from each side, so that when this painting is finally framed, I'm not boxing in my name against the side. Okay guys, I hope you enjoyed that video presentation of running you through the whole painting.